Jane. Hey, everybody. This meeting is being recorded. Good. All right. My name's Marya and I'm an alcoholic. It is wonderful to see all of you here today. Well, hello, Sarah, especially. Nice to see you again. And I see some familiar faces, which is starting to be very cool as we bop around the world in these Zoom rooms. It's kind of crazy. I do have some general topics that I'm gonna kind of come back to, but I was just thinking as I was listening to that chunk about that incredibly Baroque writing that Bill did in that passage, which I sort of love and sort of am like, wow, that 1 year sober really gave him some literary style, didn't it? But I also think about that time of loneliness, that kind of that loneliness, that chilling vapor, and realizing that I don't experience loneliness like that anymore. I mean, it's not that I don't experience loneliness. It's one of the things that I think I forget I get in sobriety is that I don't have to live in that kind of isolated loneliness, even when we are all scattered around the globe, even this last year and a half, when a lot of us have been very, very isolated, not by choice. So anyway, that's, just to start us off with a gratitude, there we are. I'm very grateful to have this community and also to have sobriety today. I was thinking about a poem that I like a lot. It's by Stephen Dobbins. I'm just going to read you one passage of it as a kind of a framework for a bit of my story and a bit of the topic I'm going to kind of cover, which is comes in the last line of this passage. This is from a poem called How to Like It. He writes, "How is it possible to want so many things and still want nothing? The man wants to sleep and wants to hit his head again and again against a wall. Why is it all so difficult? The man's wife finds him staring into the refrigerator as if into the place where the answers are kept, the ones telling you why you get up in the morning and how it is possible to sleep at night, answers to what comes next and how to like it." And that's something that I think about a lot these days. Not because I'm having trouble liking what comes next, but because I think about long-term sobriety in a really different way than I thought I would. I got sober in the year 2000. It was not my idea. It was very much not something I was interested in doing. But when I got sober, I really had no way of knowing, I think at that time, what was coming next. I had no way of thinking, this will be great. This getting sober thing is really going to be a blast. And for the first year, maybe 2 years, it's not a blast. What I didn't have any way of understanding is that sobriety isn't the end point. It isn't the destination. And it seemed that way to me. I'm like, one of these days, I'm going to get sober. I'm going to at the time I was real young. And so I thought, well, I'm going to get married. I'm going to get this job. I'm going to get. It's really acquisitive in this sort of way, but it's also sort of aspirational. I'm going to arrive at this point, and it's a very fairy tale way of looking at sobriety and life. It's the idea that once you have been swept off into this new life, that's it. That's the end of the story. And of course, 21 years later, sobriety is the sobriety. That's the meat of it. It isn't the having gotten sober, which was horrible, but the being sober. There's a different quality to being sober than to getting sober. And that's something I've had to think about a lot as time goes on. And I watch now, my daughter is sober. My daughter got sober about 1.5 years ago. Thank goodness, folks. But now when I watch her go into the year, right? So she's past her year mark. And every day, roughly, sometimes twice a day, I get these crisis texts. I'm having anxiety. And I'm like, okay, go back to work, honey. You know what I mean? I'm like, so you're texting me in the middle of the workday to tell me you're having a feeling. Like, congratulations. It's sort of like when she was 4. And I'm like, you tied your shoe. Good job. And like, you can't keep being excited. You know what I mean? Like she's looking for things to feel strongly about. Any strong feeling is an occasion to be like, I'm excited. This is horrible. I'm like, the rest of life isn't crisis. Like that isn't what sobriety has to be. And that's something that I'm so grateful now to have the opportunity to see her. She's at the same age I was when I got sober. And I get to look at her and be like, both how amazing, how wondrous to be learning all the time, to be in that constant state of newness and wonder, but also how horrible to think everything is a crisis, no matter how small a thing it may be. And there are days where I'm really like, the drama, sweet pea, keep it in your own mind, not because I don't care, but because as we get older, as we stay sober, what comes next sometimes is peace. Sometimes it's boredom. Sometimes it's sameness. Sometimes it's the middle path. Nobody goes to be like a Buddhist because it's exciting, right? But one of the reasons that I find myself drawn more and more to quiet practices, whether they are called spiritual practices or other practices in life, the reason that I am drawn to them is because they help me act against what I think of as my alcoholism, my addiction, my addictive self, right? My addictive self would love everything to be at a fever pitch all the time. But that isn't how life works. That expectation leaves me gravely disappointed all the time, right? That leaves me in a state of constant boredom. Nothing is new, nothing is exciting, nothing is risky. And then I'm back in my all or nothing again, right? When I started drinking. So here's the bit of the story. The story part of my story isn't my favorite part because it's not interesting. And it's also the briefest part of my stories because I drank so much less than I have now been sober. I started drinking when I was 10 because it seemed like I was bored, basically. I was home alone. My parents were at work. It was the 70s or 80s, I guess, at that point. And I was like, I'm bored. I got nothing to do. I'm going to have a glass of wine. So there's the whole part of like, what 10-year-old goes, I think I'll have a glass of wine with cereal for dinner. I mean, like an alcoholic, like just waiting to happen, right? That's the batshit kid that I was. And I was like, that's what I'm going to do. And it worked. It did what it needed to do, whatever that was for me. And I think for me, a lot of it was to be in a heightened state. For me, alcohol was a route to strong feeling. And that's how I've come to kind of understand my risk factors in my life. All of the addictive behaviors, all of the extremes that I've gone to, I think have always been a quick shoot to strong feeling, which apparently I'm a pretty big fan of. And so I was quickly drunk and I was juggling, and like teaching myself to juggle and walking around the house and singing Simon and Garfunkel and that was amazing. I'd never felt so much happy all at once, right? It went downhill from there, and starting that, that low, that young, it was going to go downhill pretty quick, I think. So by the time I was 15, the courts had said, we think you are probably not suited for civil society and you're going to juvie. And that is what I did. And from juvie, I was court ordered into treatments and then into AA. AA is not I wouldn't we didn't have Alateen at the time, or if we did, I was not aware of it, or the courts were not aware of it. And so Alcoholics Anonymous was not a great spot for a 15-year-old girl with an attitude. It just wasn't. I don't always think AA is a great spot for a 47-year-old girl with an attitude, but that's for me to work on. That's for me to kind of like shape our community in new ways, if I can, is by making it a space for a broader variety of people. AA didn't stick. Of course, it didn't stick. I had no idea what the steps meant. I had no idea what the principles were. Everybody wanted to be helpful in some way, which was basically to, make sure that someone fed me and gave me coffee. And that was nice. And it felt safe. It felt comfortable in that way to some extent. I wasn't done, obviously. I came back about 10 years later. And at that point had bottomed out. The way one does. I had one of those sort of garish, dramatic, Hollywood endings as, a really, the Four Horsemen, one of which is just incredible, incomprehensible demoralization, which is where I ended. And I may have ended in part because of my vanity, because I really was having a hard time looking in the mirror at that time and saying, I'm an okay person. I couldn't say it with a straight face. And I couldn't go on hating the girl I was seeing in the mirror. I could not do it. I could not do it. It was either I was going to get my life together or I was done. I was just done. And I wasn't done. So since my options were figure out how to live or just check out now, and I wasn't comfortable with that second option, I decided to figure it out. It wasn't a smooth process. I came back into AA angry, really angry. About the fact that I had to go to AA like it was somebody else's fault, like it was somebody else's responsibility, that there was only this one option for me now that I dug my little ditch. I wanted other options, I guess. I wanted better, funner options for getting myself out of a ditch, but there weren't any. So what I found in AA was an incredible group of, I accidentally got sober in a men's meeting. I walked into a men's meeting drunk and was like, is this a meeting? And they're like, shh. sure, I mean, come on in, lady. And that's where I got sober. And they behind the scenes sort of revamped it so I could be there. And that was incredibly kind of them. But those gentlemen really, they really saw that I was a tiny tornado. I was just a tornado. And that sort of passage in the book where we talk about the tornado tearing through people's lives really broke me up. I was like, that's what I am. And I've never learned how to be anything else. And so one of the first things that I realized I wanted from sobriety or in sobriety was to be a different kind of person for other people. And it wasn't just, I want to empty the ashtrays. It wasn't just, I want to bring the cake to coffee hour. I mean, it was really more I want to be a person on whom other people can depend, because I had been so deeply undependable already, even at that age. I'd been so deeply destructive, not only to myself, but to other people and to the world. And I think I had done damage that was disproportionately outsized to my importance. I had done way more damage in the world than I had done good already. So I needed to turn that around. And so for me, that became a destination in a different way than just, I need to get clean, I need to get sober. I wanted something from sobriety. And I think what I wanted from sobriety was a sense of being a person I liked. And that's really simple, but I didn't have it. I didn't have the ability to look myself in the eye and say, you're all right, you did your best today. I couldn't do that because I hadn't done that. I got tired of taking. I got tired of creating crises for other people because I wanted a crisis, because that was interesting. I got tired of the incredible shame that I felt about who I was. And now what keeps me sober at times is the same thing. There will be a moment when I'm like, I'm being a person I don't trust. I'm being an undependable human being. I'm being an unreliable. I'm being dishonest in some way. I'm being unethical. And while I love the kind of therapeutic cuddlings or the warm cozies that we get of like, I'm supporting you in your wellness, what actually worked for me, and since we're only here to share our own experience, strength, and hope, what worked for me was realizing I was not living ethically in any way, shape, or form. I was taking. And even though I was like, no one is harmed by my drinking except for me, that's garbage. It's always garbage. And if you are saying that, I say to you, it's garbage. The harm we do by not doing good, especially at this time in the world, is massive. And I could no longer live with myself in that way. So into AA I went, and these nice gentlemen are like, okay, here comes this tiny tornado in a hoodie who won't talk, won't get a sponsor, won't, participate. I'll sit there in the corner and smoke, and that's fine. Whatever, they let me be there. And that is one of the things that is so beautiful about this program and so beautiful about these steps and these principles is they don't specify how you have to act in a meeting. We want you to be sober, generally speaking, but if you aren't, okay, we can probably work with it if you're not creating any destruction. They let me be as messy as I absolutely was. And if I had had to like check a box or fill out a form or be a different person or be a different age or be even a different gender, like at that time, what I could do was show up at the church down the block from my apartment once a week. And they're like, do that, start there. And some wise person tuned me into like where the other meetings were. And I found a sponsor who, I don't even remember her name, but she was smart enough to realize that I didn't understand the first step. She was smart enough to realize that I truly did not understand what it meant that I was powerless over alcohol. I didn't get it. I'm like, I don't know what that means. Like, what does that mean? She's like, well, I mean, do you drink like this? I'm like, yeah. And she's like, well, then you're an alcoholic. I'm like, right, but what is that? So what? So what? And so she could not explain to me in a way that made sense because I couldn't understand what she was saying. That is the ripple effect of you being unable to control yourself or your life is having a ripple effect on everyone else, not just in your family, not just your friendships, but the world. What she told me instead was, can you keep your side of the street clean for like a day? Like just a day. And I was like, yeah, if I have to. And that was really hard. Like, I was really like, yes. She's like, okay, you don't have to do it for the rest of your life. Like, she skipped right over the you're a drunk, you have to stay sober for the rest of your life. What she said was like, can you behave for an afternoon? And I was like, I can work it out. I think I got this. I can make it happen. Like, I'll call you 7 times while I'm trying. She's like, that's great, lady. You know, whatever, it's fine. But what it did was keep it so minute for me. You know, what I need today, 21 years into the program, is really different than what I needed right then. And I have the utmost respect for those early weeks, days, months, years of, I can't think past this. We only know what we know. We don't even know what we don't know, right? Like, in that moment, all I could hear was that I needed to act responsibly for a day. And then I was like, that is an achievable goal. Like, I can do that, I think. And I didn't do it every day. But what that did mean every day, as some of those slogans started really working for me, one of which was, do the next right thing. And even if I could parse that 8,000 ways and go, well, what's the next right thing? I could understand that I could eliminate a number of wrong things. At least start with, like, drinking will never be the next right thing. No matter what a good idea it seems like. It's never going to, you're never going to be able to justify that to someone saying, what's the next right thing? And I'm going to respond with drinking. No one will ever agree with me on that point for me. And so I can start eliminating. That is not the next right thing. Drinking is not the next right thing. Drugs are not the next right thing. Driving my car 90 miles an hour and moving across the country is probably also not the next right thing. None of these destructive, rash, grandiose gestures are the next right thing. None of this destructiveness is ever going to be the right choice here. Sometimes the right choice, and this is what kills my daughter these days, sometimes the right choice is to just sit still. And she hates that, hates it. I'm like, but that is in fact right now what you need to do. But why? Why can't I 8, 9, 10, 11 other things that have nothing to do with the situation or that needs dealing with? Sometimes the next right thing is to sit down. And when you're 25 and just a year sober, I think that's really painful, because what you have there in that moment is yourself and questions and uncertainty and an extraordinarily powerful sense of discomfort. And so in those early days, when all I had to do was stay sober and behave for a day, what I got used to was encountering myself, my questions, my sense of discomfort at being a human being. And, you know, we can call that, we didn't get the manual on being a grown-up or being a person. None of us got the manual, not the sober people either, not the normies either. Nobody got the manual, nobody. It doesn't make us special. You know, it just means we dealt with it particularly badly. I at least did. And so now this being a human thing feels okay to me. I can get comfortable with the discomfort of, I am not okay with how I'm handling the situation. And then I can do something really rash, like sit down, because that's in my skill set. And so when I think now about what does it mean when I think about what comes next and how to like it, had I been told at 25, the hardest thing you're going to deal with in 30 years is yourself, I'd be like, you're fucking with me, right? Like, still in 30 years, it'll still be me dealing with me. I quit, you know, but actually, had I also known in 30 years, you're going to get along with yourself pretty well, because by then you'll have stopped screwing over everyone else. And that means something to me. That means something to me, that I'm the person in my life who people can go, well, if all else fails, call Marya. That means everything to me. It doesn't mean anything to me that, like, professional stuff, that's great. Professional stuff, I've gotten to do cool professional stuff because I've been sober so I could do the work. I've gotten to do stuff that in my life that's amazing, that's exciting. But really what I value is that I do know my friends trust me and rely on me and can. It doesn't stress me out to know they trust me and rely on me, because I'm like, what if I fuck it up? I won't. I know myself well enough, and I love that they can trust that I'm in a program that gives me a way of living. And however I interpret those steps, however I interpret those principles, is kind of up to me, and it's up to any one of us in this room. It's up to us how we see every one of the principles that lines up with those steps. It doesn't matter to me what anyone believes. What matters to me is that they find a way to believe in themselves and in their capacity to be decent. And this is where I feel like we maybe, you know, while I'm not at all political in this sense, I'm not at all bringing this political, but I do feel like we're in a world of hurt right now, and the world is hurting a lot right now. And my tiny dramas are almost meaningless. My tiny dramas become meaningful if I dive into them and lean into, I'm hurting. So how, in a world when all of us are in some kind of really tough spot right now, and I think we are, how do I navigate the vast space between I'm hurting right now, and in fact, I am in my life, and not get so preoccupied with that I'm unable to connect with the world that's hurting on a much greater scale. And maybe what it is that this program teaches me that if I am hurting, the best thing I can do is attend not to that hurt right this minute, but to the world. That's something that this program gives us, that it is easy to, I think, miss. That is the guidance, that is the key guidance that I have received from this program, is that if I am hurting, my next right thing is to help someone else. Because at the very least, what that does is reminds me that I am not shivering in that lonely spot. And if I am, it's kind of by choice, because there is always someone who needs something more than I do right now. Keeping my sense of scale, keeping my sense of right-sizedness has been a big, tough one for me, because I am very, very prone to careening between the grandiose. I am all that. And that's where I spend a lot less time. I spend a lot more time in the idea that I am, as my friend Ruth calls it, the special evil one, where I am so epically awful that no one could possibly understand just how bad I am, which is the same thing turned on its head. It's just the upside down Alice in Wonderland version of pride. And so if I get wrapped up in my loneliness, my awfulness, my incomprehensible demoralization, and don't take steps to move outside that little tiny space into the world and bring even those things, my loneliness, my grandiosity, my lack of humility, my character defects, my selfishness, which knows no bounds, I think. If I don't move past that and bring it to a room of people and say, if nobody else wants to say it today, I am feeling super selfish. I'm willing to own that, so that any of you in here who are feeling that and feeling compounded by that, feeling shame about it, it's fine. Like any of the things we bring to these meetings are nothing more than human experience. I do think addicts and alcoholics are prone to making all of their human experiences bigger than they always need to be. But it also does put us in a position to help each other when we're struggling. So my way through the steps was very, very, I've gone through the steps with a sponsor many, many times. My sponsor, Jim, is now 95 and does not, unfortunately, really have a sense of who I am, but he is quite amazing. So Jim became my sponsor because a couple of months into sitting in the corner smoking with my hoodie on, somebody didn't come to the meeting, and they're like, we need somebody to tell their story. Who's going to tell their story? And I said, all right, I'll tell my story. I got no idea what my story is, right? And everybody looks at me and they're like, oh my God, it talks, right? So I sit there with my hoodie up and tell my story. And at the time, the story of the use was my whole story. That was my whole life. It had been my whole life. So it was big, it was dramatic, it was full of crisis and near-death experiences and, you know, car crashes and all of the things, right? And I love that now I can look back on that and be like, that was a tiny piece of my life. It was a very, actually, to scale, it was tiny. It was loud, but it was very small compared to the 21 years I've gotten to spend learning how to be peaceful. And I'm very grateful for that, because it was a very difficult and painful and destructive time. So that's the story I told. And afterwards, two dudes came up to me, one of whom goes, God, you are just so smart. And the other one goes, how's that working for you? So I picked the latter to be my sponsor, as you, thank God, because I married the other one. Not as good an idea. But I did pick Jim to be my sponsor. My ex-husband and I had coffee yesterday. He remains a very cool dude, and we laugh a lot about that. But Jim took me through the steps. He sent me to women when I needed to talk about stuff that was much more specific to my own gender and experience. But we worked the steps very carefully. He had been sober since the year I was born, which was 1974. So he got sober not long after I hatched. So by the time I came around, he's like, yeah, I got this. his presence in my life has been sort of like a Yoda. It's been like I've just had this old wizened human being telling me, do or do not. There is no try. You know what I mean? Like he's just like had the wisdom all along. And when I have been as outsized and ridiculous as I regularly have been in my life and in my sobriety, he's been like, how's that working for you? I don't know where he got that phrase. He's too old for it, but I love it. So Jim and I have gone through the steps a lot of different times. Those fourth steps and fifth steps have been key. I've done one at least once a year for the last 21 years. And by the end of that fourth and fifth step, at this point, they're fairly short. I get to do, not because I've never done anything shitty, but because I clean house every year. It feels good to me. Not everybody needs to, not everybody wants to do it, but for me, those are deeply healing. I did not grow up religious. I have not had the kind of cathartic experience that I think people have in that dynamic. But to me, just saying to somebody, I was really horrible all year, that is healing to me, to be able to just say to somebody and have them go, you kind of were. And then you're still there having a cup of tea and it's fine. That right sizing is part and parcel of the fourth and fifth step for me. They've been really fundamentally key. That getting from, I'm neither the worst person nor the best person in any moment. I'm neither sickest nor wellest in any moment. I'm just your average human being. I'm just out there, as it says, I think it's in, a man among men or whatever, just one of the people out here trying to muddle through this bit. So 4 and 5 have been deeply important for me. As a person who does not practice a theistic spirituality, I have found 6, 7, and 8 super important in figuring out, how do I do that? How do I find out what it means to live a spiritual life or something that makes sense to me in an ethical way? I'm much more aligned with a humanist sort of philosophy than I am with any of the theistic spiritualities. But that means that I am constantly referred back to, am I living ethically? Am I making an ethical choice in any given moment? Am I being honest? Am I choosing not only the right thing for myself, but the right thing in a way that trusts that my humanity interacts with every other humanity at any given time. And any unethical choice I make has that same butterfly effect for the rest of you. And so if there is one person on the planet trying not to make a mess, that's better than not. And so it is always my job to try not to be making a mess. It's unavoidable at times, but I do try really hard. So 6, 7 have allowed me to face a spiritual practice or create a spiritual practice for myself that involves a lot of sitting down. Just sit down and think, sit down and wait, sit down and figure out what is the next right thing. Who can you turn to for support if you need support? Who can you help if what you need to do is support someone else? 9, I have found it less and less necessary to do big 9th steps, to do big amends. Over time, 10, though, becomes all of the things. And ultimately, the 11th step, I'm a meditation practitioner. I do yoga and sitting meditation. And I do quite a bit of it because it means a lot to me, because it keeps me sane. It keeps me grounded in this world that I really do love and I'm feeling a lot of grief about right now. And then we get to 12. To me, 12 really isn't about carry the message. I mean, that is important. Of course, I wouldn't have had the message if somebody hadn't carried it to me. But really, it is about practice these principles in all our affairs, especially as we're now not in the same physical rooms as much as we used to be. Carrying the message is great. That's wonderful. But to me, it is about practice these principles in all our affairs. It is about how do I bring something to the world in a way that's meaningful and that isn't attention seeking, but that is deep. How do I do the work that I need to do myself to grow as a person? Because the destination was never to get sober. If that was the destination, I would have wrapped this up 20 years ago. But I'm not done. I'm not in any way, shape, or form done growing as a human being. And so I think about, like, how is it that every day, the answers to what comes next, and how to like it. Always the question is for me, how am I preparing myself, not necessarily for the worst, not necessarily for the best? How am I framing expectations about what this life is to be, what it's supposed to be like? I feel like I've spent a lot of time in my life cross or upset or disappointed because the world wasn't what I wanted it to be or what I thought it ought to be. And that's a good way to be disappointed in the world all the time. And I thought about something the other day. There were two events. Sarah heard me talk about one of these relatively recently. Two events happened. I was out on a boat. Someone had said, hey, we can go boating at this nearby lake. I thought, all right, let's go boating. Within, I don't know, 100 yards from shore, I was suddenly realizing that joy was literally 100 yards from shore, like just exquisite, quiet, deep joy involved getting on a boat that cost $11. And that was a good thing for me to realize that the world really is incredibly beautiful in so many corners that I fail to look for, that I fail to notice. Life is astonishing in so many ways. And it brought me back to when I first did finally get sober. Once they started letting me out of detox to go outside to smoke, I remember waking up very early one morning and standing out and watching the light come up. It was February, March of this gritty, grimy urban. It's a horrible neighborhood. It's dangerous. It's dirty. I woke up that morning and stood out there and noticed the light coming up for the first time that I could even remember, because I was awake and I was clean and I wasn't hungover and I was outside in the cold, and it was so beautiful. It was just so acutely, astonishingly beautiful. And I thought, I'm never going to get this kind of beauty if I stay sick. Not only will I die, I'll also just never see it. I'll spend my whole life muffled and blocked from this beauty. What that means is that now, all this time in, I get to see that acute beauty. And sometimes I also get to feel acute pain. I don't get the one without the other. When something is painful, I don't have a way to muffle it. I get to go through it. And I do think of it that way now. I think of it as I get to go through this experience. I get to sit with someone who is dying and be there. I get to sit with them when they're gone, and then I get to sit with myself and the grief. I get to be there with my child as she struggles. I get to be there with friends as they fall in love and fall out. I get to be with people who are losing jobs, who are falling apart, who are out of money. I get to be with all of us as we struggle. But what that says to me is that I am doing the next right thing. And honestly, more times than not, that is all I need to know. Often I'm like, why can't I do more? There should be more that I could do. And that's when I'm getting back into expectations and back into, why isn't there more? I want more. Right now, there isn't always more. Right now, there's just what we have, and we are doing the best that we can. Sobriety allows me to do the best that I can. Working a program in a way that feels active, that feels growth oriented to me, allows me to continue doing better than I did, or trying to do better than I did. So for me, what comes next, I'm never going to know. I'm never going to have that certainty. And the thing that I have liked least in my life is uncertainty. That is the thing I am most afraid of, is not knowing. I have created disasters so I didn't have to wait and see if there was going to be a disaster. I have ended things that were important to me so I didn't have to dread an ending. I have crashed things so that I wasn't afraid of a crash. I don't have to do that now. Now the sense of this could go a lot of ways. It isn't comfortable, but it does allow me, and in fact, in a lot of ways, force me to expand as a spiritual force. It forces me to be okay, regardless of whether it goes south. It forces me to show up in a way I don't think that I ever would have done if I had not just gotten sober, but found this program, found this particular path that has been so healing and so generative for me and for the people in my life. There's plenty of time for me to think these days, and that's not always good. So, the early days, I think, had I had this much free time, I don't really have a lot of free time, but I have a lot of alone time. I think that, get out of your head. It's a dangerous neighborhood. I don't find mine to be a dangerous neighborhood anymore. It's pretty reliably mine. And I'm like, oh, there's that bullshit again over there in the corner. Leave it. Don't touch it. You know what I mean? Like it's all the same neighborhood. It's a very, like I live in my mind now, and for that matter, in my body as one gets older, I think people will know that feeling as well. You're like, this is sort of like a falling apart old house. I'm really comfortable in it. You know, it's, I should probably do something about the eaves. They're going to tip off soon, but mostly this is just like beautifully my own. And it feels like mine. Um, when I that allows me in an odd way to be outside it a lot more, when I'm not trying to constantly attend to either my body for that matter or my mind and fix up what's broken or wrong. It allows me to prioritize because it is in a constant state of disarray. That allows me to go, no, today what I really want to do is prune the shrubs. That's what I'm going to do today. And the shrubs will be amazing. And by the time I come back and look at the shrubs again, because I was off fixing the eaves, the shrubs will be a mess. That sort of sense of not having a static self, not having a static spiritual life, recognizing that these things are constantly decaying and falling apart. That allows me to prioritize who I am and what I work on in myself, but also in the world. I don't have to spend full time now attending to the creation of crisis. I don't have to spend full time attending to my own disasters. I can spend a lot of time attending to what feels like a very dangerous time in our world. And one of the ways that I do that is by showing up in these rooms and continuing to learn how to be a person in a world, which I apparently didn't come with the instructions for. We're at 1:40. I've talked a long time and I'm tired of hearing myself, and you may be as well. So I actually would like to open anybody who wants to share. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Thank you for letting me be here today.